The Duke was still a virgin at 45, until a peasant girl knocked on his castle during a storm. For decades, he locked himself away his hall silent, his heart untouched. But when a soaked young woman dares to cross his gates, the walls around him begin to crack. What starts as a single act of mercy soon stirs whispers in the village, scandal in the gentry, and a fire in his own soul he can no longer smother. Yet not all welcome her presence. His cousin plots in the shadows, eager to strip him of title and power, while the villagers cry for salvation after the storm's ruin. And when the truth of the girl's birth is revealed, everything he thought secure trembles on the edge of collapse. Is this the moment a lonely duke finds redemption through love? Or will society's judgment destroy them both before they ever stand together? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The autumn wind howled through the village like a wild beast, sending leaves and debris flying through the darkened streets. Inside their humble thatched cottage, Eleanor Fletcher huddled close to her younger brother Thomas, wrapping another threadbare blanket around his thin shoulders. The 11-year-old boy shivered despite her efforts, his face pale in the dim light of their single candle. "The roof won't hold much longer," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm's fury. As if confirming his fears, another crack sounded overhead, and a fresh stream of cold rainwater poured through the thatch. Eleanor's heart pounded as she watched the timbers groan and flex. The old cottage had weathered many storms, but this one was different. With each gust, the structure swayed dangerously, and the leak above them grew wider. "We cannot stay here," she decided, her voice firm despite her fear. Thomas looked up at her with wide eyes as she grabbed their last dry blanket. "We must find shelter before the roof gives way entirely. But where can we go?" Thomas asked, coughing slightly. "The village hall will be full already," Eleanor rapped, the coarse wool blanket tightly around her brother, tucking the edges to keep out the wet and cold. She knew he was right. The village hall would be crowded with others seeking refuge. As she helped Thomas to his feet, her mother's words echoed in her memory. "In times of greatest need, true nobility shows itself." Through the rain-lashed window, she could just make out the silhouette of Wexford Castle looming on the hill above. The village. The villagers told stories about its reclusive master, the Duke of Wexford, who hadn't been seen at a public gathering in years. Some said he was bitter. Others claimed he was mad with grief over a lost love. All agreed that none dared approach his door uninvited. But as another timber cracked overhead, Eleanor knew she had no choice. Thomas's life was worth more than her fear of rejection or scandal. "Hold tight to me," she instructed, guiding her brother out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked them down as they stepped outside, and the rain felt like needles against their skin. Together they struggled up the muddy road leading to the castle, their progress slowed by the treacherous footing and Thomas's weakness. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the castle's imposing stone walls. Eleanor's legs trembled with exhaustion by the time they reached the great iron gates, but she pressed on. The massive oak door loomed before them, ancient and forbidding. Drawing a deep breath, Eleanor raised her hand and knocked. The sound seemed feeble against the storm's rage, so she knocked again, harder this time. Thomas pressed against her side, shaking with cold and fear. Seconds stretched into minutes as they waited, exposed to the full fury of the tempest. Just as despair began to overwhelm her, Eleanor heard movement within. The heavy door creaked slowly open, and there, holding a brass lantern high, stood not a servant but the Duke of Wexford himself. The firelight cast dramatic shadows across his austere features as he regarded them in silence. His dark eyes moved from Eleanor's face to Thomas's huddled form, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. The heavy oak door groaned shut against the howling wind as Eleanor and Thomas stepped into the castle's vast entrance hall. Flickering shadows from wall-mounted torches danced across stone walls, and despite the grandeur, a distinct chill hung in the air. Thomas shivered violently in his wet clothes, pressing closer to his sister's side. The Duke of Wexford's commanding voice echoed through the space. "Mrs. Winters, fetch dry blankets at once. And you, James, tell cook to prepare hot broth." His tone carried authority, yet held an unexpected gentleness that made Eleanor glance up in surprise. "Send word to Dr. Morris as well. The boy needs attention." The servants scattered like startled birds, their footsteps pattering against the stone floors. The Duke himself stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the torchlight. "Come, the great hall has a fire." Eleanor guided Thomas toward the warmth, noting how the Duke walked beside them rather than ahead, matching their pace. In the great hall, a massive fireplace crackled with fresh-laid logs, and the Duke gestured to a worn but comfortable settle placed close to the flames. "Sit," he instructed, his voice softer now. "The blankets will arrive shortly." True to his word, Mrs. Winters hurried in moments later, her arms laden with thick woolen blankets. The elderly housekeeper wrapped Thomas first, then offered another, to Eleanor with a kind smile. The boy's violent shivering gradually eased as warmth seeped into his bones. Cook appeared next, bearing a tray with 2 steaming bowls of broth. The rich aroma made Thomas's eyes widen, and Eleanor noticed the Duke watching intently as her brother took his first careful sip. "Your Grace," Eleanor began, her voice quiet but steady, "I cannot thank you enough for—" He raised a hand, cutting. "Offer gratitude. It is nothing. Basic Christian charity, nothing more." Yet he remained, standing near the fire, his attention never straying far from Thomas. The household staff moved about, their tasks with an air of barely concealed amazement. Eleanor caught whispered fragments as they passed. "Never comes down from the East Wing. First time in 3 years. Usually sends orders through Mrs. Winters." When Dr. Morris arrived, soaked from the storm but efficient in his examination, the Duke stayed to hear his diagnosis. "A chill, certainly," the physician announced, "but nothing more serious, thank Providence. Warmth and rest will set him right." As the evening wore on and Thomas dozed by the fire, Eleanor found herself drawn into careful conversation with her unlikely host. The Duke spoke sparingly, yet each word seemed thoughtfully chosen. "The village must have many tales about this place," he observed, his eyes on the flames. "They do, Your Grace," Eleanor admitted, "though I see now they were quite wrong." A shadow passed across his features, perhaps not entirely. He fell silent for a long moment. "I have given them little reason to think otherwise." Through careful questions and gentle answers, Eleanor learned that the Duke had never married, had not attended London society events in over 15 years, and preferred the solitude of his library to the company of his peers. The villagers' whispers of cruelty seemed absurd now, as she watched him adjust Thomas's blanket with careful hands. What she saw instead was loneliness, in the way he lingered in their company, and how his eyes followed the comfortable interactions between servants, and the slight softening of his stern expression when Thomas thanked him for the broth. When Thomas could no longer keep his eyes open, Mrs. Winters led them to a modest but clean chamber on the ground floor. "So the boy won't have to climb stairs," she explained, helping Thomas settle into a small bed near yet another welcoming fire. Alone at last, Eleanor knelt beside her bed, her still damp skirts pooling around her. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for leading us to safety and for showing us that kindness may hide behind the sternest walls." Meanwhile, in his private study, the Duke stood at a window, watching the storm rage against the glass. The comfortable solitude he had cultivated for so many years felt different tonight, emptier somehow. The quiet that usually brought peace now echoed with remembered sounds. A boy's grateful thanks, a woman's gentle voice, the forgotten music of simple human warmth. He turned from the window, unsettled by emotions he had long thought dormant, and found his familiar sanctuary changed by the first spark of warmth he had felt in decades. Morning light crept through the towering windows of Wexford Castle, casting long shadows across worn stone floors. Eleanor smoothed her borrowed dress, a simple brown wool gown provided by the housekeeper, and followed the scent of fresh bread to the servants. All the chatter of maids and footmen died as she entered. They stared, some with open curiosity, others with barely concealed suspicion. An elderly cook placed a bowl of porridge before her with a kind smile, but the whispers continued. His Grace hasn't allowed a woman past the castle gates since the Duchess passed. One maid murmured to another. 20 years of solitude, broken by a peasant girl? Another responded, shaking her head. Mark my words, there will be trouble. Eleanor kept her eyes on her bowl, but her cheeks burned. She thought of Thomas, sleeping peacefully upstairs after the physician's care, and straightened her spine. The warmth of the porridge filled her empty stomach as morning bells tolled in the distance. Heavy footsteps approached, and Steward Whitcomb appeared in the doorway, his thin face pinched with displeasure. Miss Fletcher, he said sharply, making her name sound like an accusation. A word, if you please. In the empty corridor, the steward drew himself up. While His Grace's charity is admirable, your continued presence is quite impossible. There are proprieties to consider. My brother is still weak, sir, Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The physician himself, Sir Thomas, needs rest and warmth to recover. Nevertheless, you must leave. Today. Whitcomb's lips pressed into a harsh line. A single woman, unchaperoned, in the Duke's private residence? The gossip alone could ruin his reputation. I won't have it. Before Eleanor could respond, hurried footsteps echoed through the hall. A village messenger, mud-splattered and breathing hard, burst in. Begging your pardon, he gasped, but I must speak with His Grace. The storm... He paused, catching his breath. Half the village is underwater. The winter wheat, the sheep pens, Miller Thompson's entire barn all gone. Without help, we won't survive till spring. Whitcomb's face darkened. His Grace is not to be disturbed. Then who will help them? Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the corridor. Who will ensure children don't go hungry? Mind your place, girl, Whitcomb snapped. But Eleanor's fear had melted away, replaced by the same desperate courage that had driven her through the storm. She turned toward the great hall, where early sunlight streamed through tall windows. There, as if drawn by their voices, stood the Duke himself. Edward Harrowfield cut an imposing figure in his dark coat, his face grave as he surveyed them. Yet Eleanor saw something else in his expression, a flash of the same kindness he'd shown the night before. Your Grace. She dropped into a curtsy, then raised her eyes to meet his. Forgive my boldness, but your people need you. The messenger stepped forward, relating the village's desperate state. Whitcomb tried to interrupt, but the Duke raised a hand for silence. Eleanor watched as Edward walked to the nearest window. Morning light revealed the devastation below, fields transformed into muddy lakes, fallen trees, collapsed fences. The Duke's shoulders tensed beneath his fine coat. The village is always managed, Whitcomb insisted. They'll recover on their own, as they always have. Will they? Eleanor asked softly. Without seed for spring planting? Without livestock? Without roofs over their heads? The Duke remained silent, his reflection troubled in the glass. Finally he turned, his voice quiet but clear. Perhaps it is time I do what I ought. In that moment, Eleanor saw the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders, and her heart ached with unexpected sympathy. This proud, Lonely man stood at a crossroads between the safe isolation he'd known and the messy, demanding world of human need. His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and possibility, as morning light continued to flood the great hall. 2 days after the storm, morning sunlight streamed through the castle's tall windows. Duke Edward Harrowfield stood in his study, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. He pulled the bell cord with determined fingers. "Steward Whitcomb," he commanded when the man appeared, "have the grain stores opened. Every family in the village shall receive their share. Send carriages under my seal." Whitcomb's face tightened. "Your Grace, the stores are meant for times such as these," the Duke interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "I will ride to oversee the distribution myself." In the courtyard, stable boys readied 2 horses, the Duke's black stallion and a gentle Mari for Eleanor. She appeared wearing a borrowed riding habit, her cheeks pink with anticipation. The Duke found himself noticing how the morning light caught in her hair. "Your Grace," she curtsied, then mounted with surprising grace. The Duke raised an eyebrow, and she explained, "My mother taught me to ride, long ago." They rode side by side down the muddy lane, followed by 3 heavily laden carriages. Villagers emerged from their damaged cottages, eyes wide at the sight of their reclusive lord. Many bowed deeply, uncertain how to react to this unprecedented visit. "Good morrow," Eleanor called out warmly to a group of women. "His Grace brings grain and supplies for all." She translated their dialect of gratitude into proper English for the Duke, though he seemed to understand more than he let on dot at the village square. The Duke dismounted to oversee the distribution. Eleanor moved easily between noble and common folk, helping organize the sharing of supplies. She noticed how the Duke's stern expression softened when a small girl offered him a wild flower in thanks. "They're good people, Your Grace," Eleanor said softly, as they watched sacks of grain being carried to waiting arms. "They only needed to know their lord cared." "I have been remiss in my duties," he admitted, his voice low. The words seemed to cost him something precious. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they began their return journey. The path wound through autumn woods, golden leaves drifting down around them. In this quiet moment, away from prying eyes, the Duke's rigid posture eased slightly. "I was engaged once," he said suddenly, surprising them both. 20 years ago, Lady Margaret Ashworth." He paused, gathering words that had never been spoken aloud. "She found another, more charming, more willing to dance attendance at balls and soirees. The scandal," his jaw tightened. "I chose solitude after that. Safer, I thought." Eleanor's heart ached for the young man he had been. "Safer, perhaps," she said gently, "but lonelier too." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing past her common birth to something deeper. "Yes," he admitted. "Lonelier." The castle came into view as twilight painted the sky in soft purples. In the courtyard, stable boys rushed forward to take their horses. The Duke descended first, then turned to assist Eleanor. As she slipped from the saddle, his hand steady at her waist, something remarkable happened. He smiled. A real smile that transformed his austere features, warming his eyes and softening the lines around his mouth. Behind them, a maid nearly dropped her bucket of water, and 2 footmen exchanged meaningful glances. The moment stretched, sweet and fragile as spun sugar, before propriety reasserted itself. The Duke stepped back, bowed formally, and strode toward his study. But the smile lingered in Eleanor's memory, and in the whispers of the servants who had witnessed it. For in all their years of service, none had seen such an expression grace their master's face. The chapel bell's deep tone rolled across the castle grounds, calling the faithful to Sunday worship. Inside the small stone church, morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows on the wooden pews. The air hung heavy with incense and the whispered prayers of the congregation. Nobles filled the front rows, their silk and velvet finery a stark contrast to the simple wool and linen of the villagers behind them. Eleanor sat quietly among the castle staff, her plain dress neat but modest. To her surprise, the Duke had chosen to sit beside her rather than take his customary place at the front with the other nobility. Edward, Harrowfield's tall frame, drew curious glances from those around. His presence beside a common woman sparked whispers that rippled through the chapel like leaves in a breeze. Yet he seemed unaware of the stares, his attention focused on the priest's words about humility and truth. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she held her prayer book. The secret she carried felt heavier with each passing moment. The Duke's nearness, his subtle warmth beside her, only made her heart ache more with the burden of her truth dawed. As the service ended and the congregation began to file out, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Your Grace," she whispered, "might I speak with you privately?" The Duke nodded, his expression gentle despite his usual stern demeanor. They waited until the chapel emptied, leaving them alone in the hushed sanctuary. "What troubles you, Miss Fletcher?" he asked, his voice soft in the quiet space. Eleanor's fingers went to the small pouch hidden in her dress pocket. "I have not been entirely honest about who I am," she began, her voice trembling. "My mother, she once served in this very castle as lady's companion to the previous Duchess." The Duke's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "She was young, and there was a nobleman who—" Eleanor's voice caught. She pulled out a delicate gold ring, its single pearl gleaming in the colored light from the windows. This was hers. He gave it to her before he disappeared. 9 months later, I was born. Edward took the ring carefully, studying its craftsmanship. His face showed recognition at its quality. This was no common trinket, but a piece worthy of nobility. "I am illegitimate," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother never revealed the nobleman's name, not even to me. She left service here before I was born, to avoid scandal." The Duke's fingers closed gently around the ring. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. "Society can be cruel, Miss Fletcher. Illegitimacy is a stain that many refuse to overlook, regardless of one's character or worth." His eyes met hers with unexpected kindness. "Yet I have seen your heart these past days, your courage, your compassion for others. Those speak more truly of nobility than any accident of birth." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I wanted you to know the truth. You have shown such kindness to my brother and me. I could not bear to deceive you further." "Your honesty honors you," he replied, returning the ring to her trembling hands. "But I must warn you, there are those who would use this knowledge to harm you. The world is not always forgiving of such matters." Later that night, in her guest chamber, Eleanor sat alone by the window. Outside, dark clouds had gathered once again, and rain began to fall against the glass. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as she clutched her mother's ring, its pearl cool against her palm. The storm grew stronger, wind howling around the castle towers like a mournful song. Lightning flashed, illuminating her chamber in brief, harsh bursts. Each crash of thunder seemed to echo the turmoil in her heart, relief at finally sharing her secret, warring with shame at her birth and fear of what the future might hold. She pressed her forehead against the cold window pane, her quiet weeping masked by the sound of rain. The storm raged on, matching the tempest of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her heart. The great hall of Wexford Castle blazed with hundreds of beeswax candles, their golden light reflecting off polished silver and crystal goblets. Servants had transformed the usually austere space into a feast worthy of royalty. Garlands of autumn flowers and wheat sheaves adorned the stone walls, while long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, and harvest bounty. From the Duke's personal stores, the Duke of Wexford stood at the head table, his tall frame straight and dignified in deep blue velvet trimmed with silver. His customary stern expression had softened into something warmer as he surveyed the gathering. Before him, village folk in their Sunday best mingled with local gentry, though the latter kept mostly to their own circles, whispering behind decorated fans and casting furtive glances toward the high table. "Your Grace," murmured the steward, bowing low. "All guests have arrived, save Lord Pembroke's party." Edward nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Eleanor. She stood near a window, wearing a borrowed gown of sage green wool that somehow made her look both humble and elegant. Her dark hair was simply arranged, adorned only with a ribbon that matched her dress. Though clearly uncomfortable with the attention, she carried herself with natural grace. "Friends and neighbors," the Duke's voice rang out across the hall, commanding immediate silence. "We gather tonight to celebrate not just the harvest, but the strength of community in times of hardship." He gestured to the laden tables. "Let none go hungry within these walls." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. The Duke raised his hand, continuing, "Tonight, I wish to honor one among us whose courage reminded me of my duties to this land and its people." He extended his hand toward Eleanor. "Miss Fletcher, would you do me the honor of sitting at my right hand?" The murmur grew louder as Eleanor made her way forward. Village folk beamed with pride. She was one of their own, after all. But among the gentry, fans fluttered more rapidly, and disapproving whispers hissed like angry geese. "A common girl at the high table? Most irregular. Whatever can his grace be thinking?" Eleanor ascended the dais with quiet dignity, curtsying deeply before taking her seat. The Duke himself held her chair, an act that caused several noble ladies to nearly swoon with shock. "Miss Fletcher," Edward announced, "showed true courage during our recent troubles. When others feared to approach these gates, she thought only of her brother's safety. Her subsequent counsel helped me better understand the needs of all who dwell on Wexford lands." He raised his goblet. "To Miss Fletcher, a woman of courage." The villagers erupted in cheers, their honest joy drowning out the tepid response from the gentry. Musicians struck up a lively tune, and servants began bringing out steaming platters of food. As the feast progressed, Eleanor found herself engaged in conversation with the Duke about simple things: the changing leaves, village children's games, favorite books. For a few precious moments, the weight of social convention seemed to lift from both their shoulders. Their eyes met over their wine glasses, and Edward's smile reached his eyes for the first time in years. Eleanor's answering look held such pure joy that several observers had to glance away, feeling like intruders upon a private moment. The peaceful interlude shattered with the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones. Heavy boots struck the floor as Lord Pembroke swept into the hall, fashionably late and immaculately dressed in crimson and gold. His sharp eyes took in the scene before him. His cousin, the Duke, seated beside a common village girl, looking happier than anyone had seen him in decades. Pembroke's handsome features twisted briefly before smoothing into a practiced smile. He approached the high table with measured steps, his gaze fixed on Eleanor with calculating intensity. "My dear cousin," he called out, voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I see you've been making interesting changes to the usual order of things while I've been away." He paused at the foot of the dais, his eyes narrowing as they settled on Eleanor's borrowed finery and her place of honor beside the Duke. The warmth that had filled the great hall seemed to dim, despite the hundreds of candles still burning bright. The musicians played on, but the melody felt hollow now, as if some essential joy had been stripped from the air with Pembroke's arrival. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Duke's study, catching dust motes that danced in the air as Lord Pembroke's boots clicked against the polished floor. His face was flushed with anger as he paced back and forth, his elegant coat swishing with each turn. "This is unconscionable, cousin. A common girl, seated beside you at your own table." Pembroke's voice rose sharply. "And not just any girl, a bastard child of a servant." Outside in the corridor, Eleanor pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart pounding. She had come to bring the Duke his morning correspondence, but now found herself frozen in place, unable to move away from the heated exchange. "The girl showed courage when others cowered," the Duke replied, his voice steady but strained. "Would you have me ignore the plight of my tenants? Courage?" Pembroke spat the word. "What of your duty to your rank? To your bloodline?" His boots stopped their pacing. "Mark my words, Edward, I shall write to the crown. Your behavior shows signs of instability, of unfitness to manage such vast holdings." The Duke's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You go too far, Pembroke." "Do I?" Pembroke's tone turned silky. "A recluse for 20 years, then suddenly throwing open your doors to peasants, seating a base-born girl at your right hand? The crown takes a dim view of nobles who forget their place." Eleanor's fingers clutched at her skirts, twisting the ruff. Wool as she listened. Through the crack in the door, she could see Pembroke pull out several sealed letters from his coat. "Even now, my riders carry word to every estate within 50 miles, he said, holding up the letters with a cruel smile. "Lady Ashworth will be particularly interested to hear how the Duke of Wexford harbors an illegitimate girl in his household. And Lord Blackwood has always been eager for any hint of scandal." The Duke's face had gone pale, but his voice remained controlled. "Your spite serves no purpose, cousin." "Spite? I seek only to protect our family's honor and yours." Pembroke moved closer, lowering his voice. "Send the girl away before worse rumors spread. Unless you wish to see her name dragged through every drawing room in the county." Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She turned and fled down the corridor, her soft shoes making no sound on the stone floor. Later that afternoon, gray clouds gathered as the Duke found Eleanor in the kitchen garden, where she was gathering herbs with reddened eyes. "Miss Fletcher," he said softly, using her formal name for the first time in days, "I must speak with you." She straightened, clutching her basket of thyme and rosemary. "Your Grace, I heard Lord Pembroke this morning. I never meant to bring shame to your house." "The shame is not yours," the Duke replied, his face etched with pain. "But I cannot protect you from the cruelty of society's tongues. Already, Pembroke's poison spreads through his letters." "Then I shall leave," Eleanor said, lifting her chin despite the tears threatening to fall. "Thomas is well enough to travel." Now, the Duke took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I have arranged a cart and provisions for your journey." His voice grew hoarse. Would that I had the courage to, but he left the thought unfinished, turning away as thunder rumbled in the distance. As dusk approached, Eleanor and Thomas sat in a humble cart filled with sacks of grain and dried meat, the Duke's silent gift. She had changed back into her simple village dress. Her brief time of finery ended. Thomas, still weak from his illness, huddled under a warm blanket the Duke had insisted they keep. From his private study in the highest tower, the Duke watched the cart begin its journey down the winding road. His fists clenched at his sides as he fought the urge to call out, to stop them, to defy Pembroke and society's cruel judgments. But fear for Eleanor's reputation held him silent. Below, Eleanor kept her face hidden beneath her bonnet, refusing to let the servants see her tears as the cart passed through the great gates. The first drops of rain began to fall, as if the heavens themselves wept for the parting of two hearts bound by circumstance but separated by the unforgiving laws of class and propriety. The cart wheels creaked through mud as Eleanor and Thomas returned to their village. The morning mist clung to the thatched roofs, many still bearing the storm scars. Villagers emerged from their cottages at the sound, their faces lighting up despite their worn clothes and tired eyes. "Mistress Eleanor," old Martha called out, hurrying forward as fast as her weathered legs could carry her. "The Duke's grain saved us all. We've been praying for your return." Thomas helped his sister down from the cart while others gathered round. Some reached to embrace her, others touched her sleeve in greeting. Their gratitude warmed her heart, even as it ached with memories of the castle. "The roof's gone completely," Baker Willis said, gesturing to what remained of Eleanor's cottage. "But we've saved what we could of your things. Been keeping them dry in my storage room." Eleanor squeezed his hand in thanks. "You are all too kind. Now, let us see what can be mended." In the days that followed, she threw herself into work. Her needle flew through torn garments as she sat by the baker's hearth, where he had offered them temporary shelter. Thomas grew stronger, helping sort salvaged vegetables from the ruined gardens. The villagers shared what little they had, making do with the Duke's provisions. But whispers reached them, even here. Traveling merchants brought tales of Lord Pembroke's letters spreading like wildfire through noble houses. They spoke of the Duke's reputation being questioned, of raised eyebrows and shocked murmurs behind painted fans. "They say he's gone silent," a peddler told them one morning, warming his hands by the communal fire. "Locked himself away again." "He has. Not even his steward sees him most days." Eleanor's hands stilled on her mending, needle poised mid-stitch. The thought of the Duke retreating into solitude once more made her chest tight with grief. But she forced herself to continue her work, focusing on each careful stitch. "The Duke showed us true kindness," she declared to the gathered villagers. "Whatever lords and ladies might whisper, we know his heart. Hold fast to that truth." The people nodded, remembering how their noble lord had finally opened his gates, how he had ridden among them, listening to their needs. They had seen the man behind the title, and they trusted Eleanor's word. She continued her rounds through the village, helping where she could. Here, straightening a fence post. There, showing a young girl how to patch a torn sleeve. All the while, she carried the weight of the Duke's reputation in her heart. One crisp morning, as she hung freshly mended shirts to dry, a merchant's wagon rattled past with news that made her blood run cold. "Royal inspectors," he called out to the curious. "Villagers, coming to assess the estate, they are." Lord Pembroke's letters reached high places indeed. Eleanor's hands gripped the damp linen. She knew what this meant. Pembroke had made good on his threat to question the Duke's fitness to manage his lands. The inspectors would arrive expecting to find chaos and mismanagement, their minds already poisoned by malicious gossip. She walked to the muddy road that led toward the castle, now invisible beyond the rolling hills. The same road she had climbed that stormy night, desperate for help. The same road that had led her to discover the Duke's true nature, not the cold recluse of legend, but a man of quiet dignity and compassion. Looking down that rain-rutted path, Eleanor felt steel enter her spine. She would not stand idle while Pembroke's lies threatened to undo all the good the Duke had done. The villagers knew the truth, and she would make sure that truth was heard. "What are you thinking, sister?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside her. Eleanor's eyes never left the road as she answered, her voice firm with purpose. "I'm thinking that sometimes the plainest truth speaks louder than the fanciest lie." The great hall of Wexford Castle echoed, with tense silence as three royal inspectors sat at the high table, their crimson robes stark against the ancient stone walls. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, illuminating the Duke of Wexford's gaunt face as he stood before them, his shoulders straight despite the weight of accusation. Lord Pembroke moved forward, a leather folio clutched in his manicured hands. "Your honors," he said, his voice smooth as honey, "I present letters from 12 noble houses attesting to my cousin's declining judgment. See here his signature on orders distributing noble stores to common folk, proof of his deteriorating sense of propriety." The Duke remained silent, dark circles beneath his eyes betraying sleepless nights. The servants lining the walls watched with bated breath as their master faced judgment. The leading inspector, a gray-haired man with keen eyes, began to speak, when sudden commotion erupted from the entrance hall. The heavy oak doors swung wide. Eleanor Fletcher strode in, her simple dress mud-splattered but her head held high. Behind her came a tide of villagers' farmers with dirt-stained hands, mothers with children clinging to their skirts, elderly men leaning on walking sticks. They filled the hall's edges, faces determined despite their awe of the grand surroundings. "Your honors," Eleanor called out clearly, her voice carrying to the rafters, "I beg you hear the truth before passing judgment." Lord Pembroke's face darkened. "This is highly irregular. Let her speak," the lead inspector commanded. Leaning forward with interest, Eleanor approached the high table, reaching into her pocket. "First, I must reveal who I am." She held up a delicate silver ring, its blue stone catching the light. "This belonged to my mother, who once served as companion to the Duchess of Marlborough. Though I am born of common blood, I carry noble heritage, and with it, understanding of both worlds our Duke has bridged." Murmurs rippled through the hall. The Duke's eyes widened, fixed on Eleanor's face. "When storm and flood threaten our lives, His Grace opened not just his gates but his heart," Eleanor continued. "He provided shelter, medicine, and comfort with his own hands. No servant's tale, for I witnessed it myself. She speaks true," called out Tom Cooper, the baker, stepping forward. The Duke rode out himself in the mud and rain, asking after every family's needs. "My own children eat today because he opened his granaries. Our cottages stand rebuilt with timber from his forests," added Widow Matthews, her aged voice trembling but firm. One by one, villagers stepped forward to testify. They spoke of carriages laden with supplies, of the Duke's personal visits to assess damages, of his quiet integrity in fulfilling his duty to all his people. Regardless of station, the inspectors listened intently, making notes on parchment. Lord Pembroke's face grew increasingly purple with rage. "This is nonsense," he burst out. "Common rabble coached to speak pretty tales." "Silence," commanded the lead inspector. He turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, what say you to these testimonies?" The Duke of Wexford straightened, something of his old strength returning to his bearing. His gaze swept the hall, from the anxious nobles to the hopeful villagers, before settling on Eleanor's upturned face. Slowly, deliberately, he descended the steps. The hall held its breath as he crossed to where Eleanor stood. Without hesitation, he took her hand in his. "My lords," he said, his voice ringing clear and strong, "these good people speak the truth, as this remarkable woman has taught me to do. She awakened my conscience, showed me the true meaning of nobility." He turned to face the assembled crowd, Eleanor's hand still clasped in his. "She is my heart, my truth, and my future." The hall erupted in gasps. The inspectors exchanged thoughtful glances while Lord Pembroke sputtered in incoherent outrage. But the Duke stood unwavering, his fingers entwined with Eleanor's, as autumn sunlight streamed through the windows and illuminated them both in its golden glow. The church bells of St. Mary's rang out 3 times across the autumn countryside, their joyous peals echoing through the valley. Morning sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the weathered stone floors where nobles in silk and villagers in wool gathered together, an unprecedented sight in the ancient sanctuary. Whispers of excitement rippled through the crowd as the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Eleanor Fletcher stood in the doorway, a vision that drew gasps of appreciation from both high-born and common folk alike. Her gown, though modest in design, spoke of quiet, elegant, scream-colored silk trimmed with delicate lace that had once belonged to the Duke's mother. Her dark hair was crowned with white roses, and in her trembling hands she clutched a bouquet of late-blooming flowers from the castle gardens at the altar. Edward Harrowfield, Duke of Wexford, stood tall and transformed. Gone was the stern, isolated figure who had haunted the castle's halls. In his place stood a man radiating joy, his eyes bright with anticipation as they fixed upon his bride. His formal attire, immaculate as always, seemed to shine with new purpose. Thomas Fletcher, beaming with pride, escorted his sister down the aisle. The boy who had once sheltered from a storm now walked with the confidence of one who knew his place in this new world. As they passed, villagers reached out to touch Eleanor's gown for luck, while the nobility found themselves moved by the pure love evident in every step she took. When Eleanor reached the altar, the Duke extended his hand. Their fingers intertwined with a sureness that spoke of hearts already bound. The morning light caught the sapphire ring on Eleanor's finger, her mother's ring, now a symbol not of shame but of destiny. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. "We are gathered here today to witness a union blessed not only by God, but by the love of all assembled." As the ceremony proceeded, something remarkable happened. The whispers of scandal that had once threatened to destroy them melted away like frost in spring sunshine. In their place bloomed acceptance, then celebration, as the congregation watched. Two souls join as one. "I, Edward," the Duke spoke, his voice clear and strong. "Take thee, Eleanor," she responded, her words soft but unwavering. "Take thee, Edward." When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in cheers that shook the rafters. Nobles found themselves embracing peasants, old prejudices forgotten in the wave of joy that swept through the sanctuary. The celebration moved to Wexford Castle, where the great hall blazed with hundreds of candles. Tables groaned under the weight of food meant for all fine pastries alongside hearty bread, wine flowing freely for every guest. Musicians struck up lively tunes that soon had the whole gathering on their feet. The Duke and his new Duchess led the first dance, their movements graceful and sure. As other couples joined them, no one paid any mind to whether their dancing partners were silk or homespun. Children darted between the dancers, servants shared treats with baronets, and old women from the village taught courtly ladies the steps to country dances. As evening drew near, the celebrations continued below, while the Duke led his bride to his private chambers. The room, once a symbol of his isolation, had been transformed. Fresh flowers scented the air, and a warm fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across polished furniture. Outside, the last storm of autumn spent itself against the castle walls, but within, all was peace. Edward drew Eleanor close, his fingers gentle as they clasped her hand. The firelight caught the tears of joy in her eyes as she gazed up at her husband, no longer the lonely Duke, but a man who had finally found his heart's home in the quiet of their chamber. As the storm outside gradually calmed to gentle rain, they held each other close. The transformation was complete, from solitude to partnership, from duty to love, from broken past to blessed future. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.